One, is it inhumane to give someone a dose of their own medicine? Two, will there be violence in the culture war? Three, my picks of the week for a weekend of football. It's the Will Cain Podcast on Fox News Podcast. What's up? Welcome to Friday. Welcome to the weekend. As always, I hope you will download, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your audio entertainment. Apple, Spotify, or at Fox News Podcast. If you think it's so worthy, please give it a 5-star review and leave a comment. You know, I consider myself an open book, but I don't think I offer up much of my personal life unless I'm asked. I won't dodge. I'll answer any question. I'll never say someone is beyond the pale, but I also don't vomit up the details of my personal life on a voluntary basis. I don't know why. It feels a little self-indulgent. It feels a little bit, look at me. I guess I have no problem sharing with you my thoughts, the narcissistic, egotistical impulse to suggest you might be interested in my opinion, but it's beyond the pale for me to think you want the details of my personal life. I don't know if that makes sense, but it seems to be part of my guiding ethos. But if I am asked, I will answer those questions. And this week, I was asked those questions on 2 separate podcasts. I'll point you to and recommend for you 2 good listens, 2 good podcasts. First, I was on the House of Strauss podcast with my one-time colleague at ESPN, Ethan Strauss. In that podcast, which exists beyond a paywall, we talked about my experience on First Take. He wanted to know how much of that infamous sports juggernaut is scripted. He wanted to know about my personal relationship with Stephen A. Smith. In that conversation, we talked about that the truth is I'm a little disappointed in myself for honestly holding back on some of my former colleagues because of my personal relationship. When someone is human to you, it's harder to unload on their opinion. We talked about Jay Bilas in the BYU Duke controversy. We did a deep dive on audiences' willingness to buy into hoax. He asked about my former colleague Kate Fagan and our personal relationship. And I answer any question that is asked. It's just not something I'm in the habit of offering up unsolicited. Ethan Strauss's thoughts, by the way, are worth the paywall. I don't always agree, but he always makes me think. And he has an awesome column up behind that paywall right now on the BYU Duke hoax. The second podcast I would point you to is one of my co-host friend and colleague, Rachel Campos Duffy, who hosts a podcast right here at Fox News Podcast with her husband, Sean Duffy. It's called From the Kitchen Table. And in this episode up this week, which is free, you can hear a conversation between Rachel, Sean, myself, and our third co-host, Pete Hegseth. In that conversation, we don't talk so much about our opinions of the country, but we talk about our lives and our relationship. We talk about what makes Fox and Friends Weekend work. And I've been in business 10 years, in the business of talking on television for a decade. And I can say with no ego, Fox and Friends Weekend works. And it's because of that personal relationship between Rachel, Pete, and I. We talk about why. We talk about our personal lives. We talk about this ridiculous travel schedule that I'm maintaining and Pete has just begun. We talk about our families, our wives, and our children. It's all personal, if that is of all interest. Don't dodge it. Don't vomit it up on the table. But when asked, don't dodge it. Go check out From the Kitchen Table, Sean and Rachel's excellent podcast here at Fox News Podcast. For now, though, let's look in the mirror and talk about our opinions. Story number One, is it inhumane to give someone a dose of their own medicine? The latest iteration of our illegal immigration crisis at the southern border of the United States is that it is now an illegal immigration crisis in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. That's because Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has sent a plane load of illegal immigrants to that luxury island off the coast of Massachusetts, an island that the rich and famous call home in the summer, an island that is home to former president, at least in part of the year, Barack Obama. It's the latest in shifting the discussion, shifting the impact, shifting the focus of the illegal immigration crisis from Del Rio to Chicago. And it's all too much for Democratic politicians in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and the governor of Massachusetts. They see it as a political stunt. It may be. And they see it as inhumane. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, speaking on behalf of the Biden administration, said it's inhumane to dump people off far away from their home, which is exactly what is taking place in Arizona, California, and Texas. They are voluntarily being dumped off in McAllen, or in this case now, voluntarily being dumped off in Chicago. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot says that it's positively unchristian to do so. New York Mayor Eric Adams has said his city is at the breaking point because of, I believe, roughly 2,000 illegal immigrants taxing that city's welfare system. A city of 8 million struggling with 2,700 illegal immigrants. In Washington, D.C., they've marshaled the National Guard to deal with 8,000 illegal immigrants. And again, meanwhile, on the southern border of the United States, in little towns of populations of 36,000, they are watching hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants come in each month. Tens of thousands of illegal immigrants flood their cities on an hourly basis. And 2 million encounters of illegal immigrants in the past year. How can a politician in a quote-unquote sanctuary city look with a straight face at a nation dealing with this epidemic, at a nation buckling and changing from this migration, and say it's all too much for me in Chicago? What is a sanctuary city but an invitation? If you sent out invitations to a party and people had the temerity to accept your invitation, how do you turn around and say, what are you doing here? Putting a burden on my water bill, using my toilet, drinking a glass of water. Well, I was invited. That's the nature of a sanctuary city. And I've struggled with just the right analogy, but I think sticking with the theme of water might actually be the best. It's as though your neighbor has been doing some massive construction project and in the process breaks a water line, and the water is dumping over into your property, flooding your lawn, your grass, killing your trees. Water flowing unabated from his property onto yours. It's his project, his policies, his action, and then his inaction that is causing your property to be flooded. And then you, noticing this problem is A, in existence, B, quite profound, and C, going unresolved, to get his attention, you bail a few buckets of water and pour it out over into his lawn. Maybe you even install a pump and just divert a bit of the flood back onto his property. He comes storming out of his front door, stomping across the lawn. How dare you, in all self-righteousness, be pumping water onto my azaleas as you're standing in ankle-deep water next to your driveway? How does he do that with a straight face. How does Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago, Mayor Bowser in Washington, D.C., Mayor Adams in New York City, with a straight face, look at the governor of Texas and say that is positively unchristian? That is positively inhumane, says Karine Jean-Pierre. Was it inhumane, by the way, when the Biden administration was flying underage migrant children in the middle of the night to northern states like New York? Oh, that was happening. That was happening much before it was the idea of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. What then, though? Was that not inhumane? Is it only inhumane if it's done by your political opponent? If it's done to draw attention to your own failures? If it's not hidden in the middle of the night? Is it not humane if done by someone who is asking you to fix the problem? I don't know if this political stunt is of worth. I think it is quite genius in shifting the focus and shifting the conversation and drawing attention to a problem that everyone wants to ignore. I did have a friend put this in context and let me know that the year-round residents of Martha's Vineyard, the residents that would be living there in the fall, in September, are not the rich and the famous, not the elite of the summer months, not the Obamas in Martha's Vineyard. It's the blue-collar workers, the roofers, the plumbers, who live there year-round, and those who will most acutely feel this problem, truly feel this problem. It might be spotlighted with the name-brand recognition of elitism that is Martha's Vineyard, but it won't actually impact the elite. To do that, I don't know. Maybe you should drop them off on the Upper East Side of New York. Maybe you should drop them off at Beacon Hill in Boston. I don't know. But it is a spotlight. Will the political stunt work? I do think people, set aside partisans, people should increasingly look to be people of action. And to the extent that we can, and I am somewhat pessimistic that we can, but to the extent that we can, elect politicians of action. Make no mistake, I don't begrudge Governor Greg Abbott his political stunt. I think it's one of the most genius political stunts, certainly, of his term as governor of Texas. I certainly don't begrudge Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who has been a man of action. But there's far too many politicians satisfied with the tweet, the sick burn, bro, to their million-plus followers. There's far too many people happy to live by the hashtag. I don't know if this is a complete detour, but I was reminded this past week with the news that CNN is canceling its morning program, New Day, and canceling its late-night program starring Don Lemon, and moving Don Lemon to the host of the new morning program, for now we will call New Day. I was reminded of an interaction I had with Don Lemon some 10 years ago. The news cycle was that then First Lady Michelle Obama had tweeted out, hashtag bring home our girls. Do you guys remember the bring home our girls viral moment? There was some, I don't know, 200 young ladies in Africa kidnapped by the Islamist rebel group called Boko Haram. They kidnapped all these young ladies from one village and took them off into the jungles of Africa, and they were completely disappeared. And it became a thing, like so many things in society, to tweet about, to hashtag activism on social media, until it manifested in the First Lady of the United States doing so in a photo, holding up literally a piece of paper with the hashtag bring back our girls on the cover of the New York Post. And I really got into it with not just Don Lemon, but it was like 3 of 4 people on a set on CNN telling me how wrong I had gotten it by indicting society's slacktivism. Is that what we call it? Sit on your couch, tweet, and you've done your social duty. They absolutely lost their heads. You can go see this on YouTube, and said I needed saving. as would one day be a precursor for my attitude on First Take. Even back then, I was telling them, I don't need to be saved. But that slacktivism, hashtag activism, bring home our girls, hasn't gone away. It's only metastasized, 2020, put up a black box on your social media to show you stand with racial justice. And today, far too many politicians, I'm telling you, elected members of our United States government, in effect, do the same thing. Now they don't put up black boxes or hashtags. Now they publish sick burns, bro. So I don't know. I don't know if this political stunt will actively solve the problem. I know we need people of action, but I certainly know giving someone a dose of their own medicine and shifting the focus and shining the spotlight is not inhumane. Story number 2. Will there be violence in the culture war? I bring you this discussion as an analysis of the current state of the United States of America. Certainly not one that I hope is prophetic, and certainly not one that I offer as encouragement, but rather concern. Will there be violence in our culture war? This question occurred to me after the Red speech by President Joe Biden some week and a half ago, where he made MAGA Republicans the latest target of the divide in our nation. Joe Biden said in that speech that America is not a country of violence, not a country that was founded on violence, but one that was founded upon democracy. And today there is a new threat from within, inside, that is our threat to democracy. It is an increasingly extremist rhetoric. It is those who were first described as deplorable, those who were then described as grabbing for their Bibles and their guns, those who were then decried as undemocratic, then threats to democracy, ultimately semi-fascists. The language ramps up. And what you have to realize with some historical context is that A, Joe Biden is wrong about his description of America, one that is founded upon democracy and not upon violence. And B, he is toying. One could even argue inviting. For him to be reminded of the historical record that America is actually a nation bathed in blood, that America is actually a country founded upon violence. First, some history. Of course, we were born of revolution. In the last episode of the Will Cain podcast, or rather, on Monday's episode of the Will Cain podcast, I talked with Douglas Murray about how rare it is for a nation built upon a revolution to be one that is also built upon conservatism, meaning an adherence, a tip of the cap, a reverence for tradition, checks and balances, limitations on power. Revolutions by their very nature are not only progressive, disrupting the established order, but they are violent. And they continue to be cycles of those very same characteristics throughout history. Cuba, France. It's very rare to see something born of violence, born of revolution, become something stable and democratic with a reverence for conservatism. That is the United States of America. But we did not leave behind violence and all of a sudden embrace the ballot box. We have had miniature rebellions and certainly violence throughout our history. Shays' Rebellion, of course, the Civil War. We've had the Black Panthers in the 1960s. We had American Indian Wars in the 1800s, violence on the frontiers with the settlers, and even violence among American Indian movements as late as the 1970s, such as Wounded Knee. Violence has never been very far outside of arm's reach for America, and we have understood that. It is one of the reasons, not that we should distance ourselves from the Second Amendment, but that we should embrace the Second Amendment, because the ultimate protection against tyranny is self-defense. But it is undoubtedly true that violence has been a part of American history, and that makes it undoubtedly dangerous that Joe Biden continues to ramp up and toy and play with the idea of violence in modern America. Make no mistake, those that would be the enemies of the Biden administration, those that would be the enemies of the regime, should not, whether or not you are semi-fascist, threats to democracy, deplorables, should not take the bait. But also be clear, there is bait. Oh, make no mistake, by playing with this rhetoric, there's almost a glee, a bloodlust. There's almost an invitation, in the same way that a sanctuary city is an invitation, almost an invitation on behalf of the regime for others to indulge in violence. Have you ever seen more glee? Have you ever seen more coverage? Have you ever seen a cat more tightly attached to its catnip than the mainstream media and the Democratic Party are to the idea of insurrection, to the story of January 6th? There's also been, of course, the active encouragement in the present tense in 2020 of the Black Lives Matter riots. The bait is there. It's upon those who are described as the threats to democracy not to take the bait, while acknowledging that it sits there as bait. It's interesting when you think about the concept of violence. Again, in that podcast with Douglas Murray, we talked about that the history of the world is empires spreading their boundaries for resources. It's the history of man, not just empires, tribes, violently spreading their wings and their territory in order to live a more prosperous life. We talked about it in the context of the British Empire. We talked about it when it came to Australia. But as we look at, for example, what's taking place in Ukraine, we're seeing the limitations of that historical application to present day. Russian soldiers aren't fighting for Vladimir Putin the way that German soldiers would have fought for Germany when they thought that their whole world depended upon taking over Eastern Europe as their breadbasket. They were wrong, by the way. They were wrong. For one thing, artificial fertilizer had just been invented, and everybody, the entire crop yields of the entire world went up, and you literally did not have to fight for your food. Hitler was wrong in thinking he needed literally more land to feed Germans. But the point is, the history of war is one to acquire resources and wealth through conquest and violence. Vladimir Putin has no conquest, no wealth, no risk-reward ratio to sell to Russians, so they don't fight. But a man will fight for his home. He will fight in defense. The Ukrainian will fight in defense of his home, his country, his culture. That is the spirit that remains. The risk-reward analysis in modern-day global geopolitics isn't there for the motivated soldier. How does he get rich? What does it do for his family? What does it do for his nation to spread their borders? But he'll fight to the fingernail in defense of his home, in defense of his culture. And so what you see is a culture war taking place in the United States of America, and people will fight in defense of their culture. There's a fascinating new book coming out in a few months, and I can't wait to get the author here on this podcast. It again ties into the conversation we had with Douglas Murray. Are all cultures created equal? In it, this author, Garrett Jones, in a book called The Culture Transplant, offers up the idea that migration patterns, illegal or legal migration patterns, don't result in the assimilation one presumes. In other words, it isn't just the immigrant who retains the culture and mores and customs of his homeland, but actually generations, children and grandchildren who retain those same attitudes. And that's not something to shrug at or wave your hand at. We're talking about differing attitudes on trust, on democracy, on the role of government, on attitudes towards women. You can't ignore that there is a culture in the United States of America. Ann Coulter has a column up at her Substack where she compares the value of cultures, and specifically on the issue of treatment of women. And there is really no culture on the planet that treats women with as much respect as does the culture of America. I know it's very fashionable to pretend there is no culture of America, but there is, and it is worth defense, and it will be defended. But don't take the bait on defending that with violence. That's the invitation. That's the hope. That's the lust. That's the glee. Because that's the path to the boot heel. That's the path to the consolidation of power. And honestly, that's the path of the dark side. I don't know. You know, it's really hard. And we had this conversation again, hearkening back to a previous episode of the Will Cain podcast with Ned Ryan. It's really hard in the modern telling of America to identify who is the good guy, right? What I mean by that is, as we're told, you know, it's easy to identify the bad guy. I mean, it's the semi-fascist. It's the threat to democracy. Who's the good guy? If we can answer that question, we can answer who's actually in charge in this regime. Is it the administrative state? Is it an oligarchy as presented by Ned Ryan in that episode of the Will Cain podcast? Is it corporate America, corporatism, corporations, a potentiality that now shares opinion on both the left and the right? Is it the wealthy who call the shots? Is it the elite? And who are the elite? Are they the well-educated? Are they the well-off? Are they in government? Are they in finance? Are they in entertainment? Are they in media? Are they in tech? Who's the good guy? Who's in control? Or is it more amorphous? Is it a doctrine that ties all these together? Is it the idea that if you hold all the right opinions, then you're elite? And we both know there is a almost published, although constantly edited, series of right opinions to hold. They don't guarantee you access to the elite, but you don't get to be in the elite without them. They are a necessary but not sufficient requirement for American elitism. But while it's hard to define who the good guy is in this telling of the story, it is not hard to define who is the bad guy. Those that do not hold those opinions. Oh, yes, blue-collar workers, but not exclusively blue-collar workers. Oh, yes, middle class, but not exclusively middle class. Try to be wealthy and hold the wrong opinions, and then get access with the elite. It is the semi-fascist. It is the threat to democracy. It is the deplorable. This is the bad guy and the telling of the story. And this is the American being tempted with the bait, being invited to violence in this culture war. I'm not here to preach to you a message of despair. I'm not here to tell you we are headed headlong into a civil war. I am not here to tell you that America has a dark future. I'm here to tell you that we're being invited to that dark future. And the only way to respond, you can tell I'm pessimistic about the prospects of electoral politics. Not that those should be ostracized, not that those should be ignored. Not unlike holding the right opinions, they are a necessary but not sufficient component of this culture war. You have to elect the right politicians with a different doctrine, with a different set of ideas. But they also have to be men of action who don't just tweet. Sick burn, bros. Modern day, a decade later, hashtag activism. But rather, my hope My optimism comes from the sufficient part of this mathematical equation. If electoral politics is necessary but not sufficient, what does that leave? It leaves the sufficient part of this cultural war. And that is you and me. And that is ground up revolution. And that has nothing to do with violence. That's a Chick-fil-A worker tackling a carjacker in Florida. Did you see that story as a man tried to carjack? It looked like a jacked up Jeep Rubicon with a baby in the back. And he was tackled by one of those young, probably teenage, maybe high school students who make that Chick-fil-A line work wonderfully efficient while delivering that wonderful goodness that is a number one. He set down his electronic device and tackled. Put a pretty nice shoulder into him as well, like a middle linebacker. The carjacker. That's ground up activism. That's a man of action. That man didn't have time to tweet, "Bring back our girls." It's also, last week, I had the honor of watching the Dallas Cowboys take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a suite with a bunch of Army Special Forces Green Berets. It's also watching them transition into a life, some of them without all of their limbs, transition into a life of productivity and promise after they've already set down the tool of violence. Not just the gun, but themselves. They were the tool of violence. If there's anybody willing to accept an invitation to violence, it would be the men who have been the tools and trained to be the tools of violence by this very nation. And I watch as they turn and tell me about their newest project, to offer up water with a purpose. Buy this water, and you give back to a veteran who's struggling with adjustment to civilian life. Man, that's a ground up revolution. That's a lifetime of learning how to be men of action. That's how you win a culture war. Jordan Peterson's famous for saying, you don't want to be a soft man in hard times. You want to be a monster who's tamed, but could always defend himself. We don't take this bait. We don't take this invitation to violence in the culture war. We reject those slurs, those labels, those defamations, that name calling. We reject the bait. We attempt to change the doctrine, but most importantly, we take action. I hope, including for myself, I hope I can be a part of taking action and winning this revolution and this culture war from the ground up. Story number 3, my football picks of the week. Not the best start for Will when it came to football betting last weekend, but better than his Dallas Cowboys. Oh, well, Will, how hard was that? How difficult would that be? That's not nice for you to say to me. It's really not. You don't kick a man when he's down, right? Right? I went 2-3 last week. In my 5 weekly picks last Friday, I lost, happily, on Texas, Alabama, as Texas covered the 20.5 points, and my private bet of 17 points with John McLemore of Master Built Grills, who'll be donating to my charity of my choice very soon. I lost on Baker Mayfield's revenge tour. The Carolina Panthers did not beat the Cleveland Browns. And I lost on the Arizona Cardinals covering against the Kansas City Chiefs. Clearly, I banked too much on Kyler Murray, and he needs to get back to studying the playbook. By the way, is that racist now? I can't remember. Was that one racist or is that not racist? That the Cardinals put in his contract that he had to satisfy a certain number of study hours when he got this new, what does he make now? It's probably what, $35 million a year? I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe $40 million a year. Hey, we need you to study, Kyler. That's racist. You got smoked, Kyler. That stinks. I also won, though, on Kentucky covering and beating Florida, and the Buccaneers covering and beating the Dallas Cowboys. 2-3 on the week. I will bet you, although we have no way of memorializing this bet, I'm going to end up north of 500, and we're all going to end up making money over the long haul in this season. And hopefully we start out that way this week. Here are my 5 picks of the week. First, I have no rational reason to pick against Oklahoma, to pick for Nebraska. But I'm going to do so. And it's not because I hate Boomer Sooner. Nebraska fired Scott Frost this week, and I don't know what was going on in Lincoln. It seems like there was bad juju, bad vibes all around. Scott Frost just wasn't whatever it needed to be in Lincoln. And the real question is, will it ever be? Nebraska is really the most fascinating study in college football that I can imagine. How can you be so dominant in the 80s and 90s and then fall so far off and stay off for the better part of 25 years? Well, that's the Dallas Cowboys, Will. You're right. We can more easily diagnose what happened there. Can Nebraska get back? I don't know. But I do think probably a weight has been lifted off the Cornhuskers this week. They're getting 10.5 at home against Oklahoma. I'm going to take the 10.5, and I'm going to go with the more jubilant, free-spirited, weight-free Nebraska to at least cover against Oklahoma. Sticking in college football, I like this. I don't know why. I get 3.5 points taking BYU on the road at Oregon. Oregon looked awful in that opening game against Georgia. Really bad. Now, Georgia's awesome. Right? Georgia's really good. But BYU beat a good Baylor team. Baylor wasn't overrated. BYU was underrated. And BYU now gets 3.5 points to go take on Oregon. I like it. Give me BYU plus 3.5 and Nebraska plus 10.5 in college football. I toyed around with SMU against Maryland, taking SMU, and Texas Tech against North Carolina State, taking Texas Tech. Didn't feel strongly enough and wanted to stay far away from Miami, Texas A&M. I have no idea what's going to happen in College Station. But those are my 2 bets of the week, BYU and Nebraska in college football. On to professional football and Sunday. I like the Colts -4 visiting the Jacksonville Jaguars. I like them enough that I've picked up Matt Ryan in several of my fantasy football leagues. Ryan threw the ball 50 times last week in tying the Houston Texans. But the Jags also gave up a ton of yards to Carson Wentz and the Commanders. I think the Colts, with Jonathan Taylor, and as Matt Ryan figures out a little more efficiency, are going to be an offense that can walk all over the Jags and cover 4 points. Give me the Colts. Give me also, we're going to call the next 2 picks my rose-colored glasses picks of the week. Okay? It's an explanation for what happened, in part, last week. Give me the Buccaneers -2.5 at New Orleans. Now, Tom Brady's been really bad against New Orleans Saints. Really. I think he's 8 touchdowns, 10 interceptions in his career against the Saints. So I don't know what that is. I don't know what that's about. But I think what we don't fully appreciate about what went down in Dallas is, yes, the Cowboys were terrible, but also the Bucs defense is actually really good. The defensive line, Vita Vea, really dominant. Devin White, as a linebacker, flying around, dominant. Okay? And on the other side now, you have Jameis Winston, who I like as a fantasy quarterback, but Jameis, who might be the most confusing person on the planet. What did he say about, we like pain? What kind of pain? Or feel pain? All pain. All over. I'm not doing it justice. It's comedic, as always, when it comes to Jameis. Unintentional comedy, I think. He didn't mean to be funny. He also doesn't mean to throw interceptions, but he does a ton. And I think the Bucs defense. You see the story, by the way, that Tom and Giselle are separated? That's why he must have gone away during training camp. Hey, in seeing that story that Tom and Giselle are separated, I heard on his podcast this week with Jim Gray, which I didn't even know he had a podcast. He said something that really resonated with me personally, and then it probably tells the story of what's going on in his life. He said, for 23 years, I haven't had a Christmas or a Thanksgiving. For 23 years, somebody was born between August and January. I haven't been able to go to their birthday party no matter how much I love them. For 23 years, he's missed every funeral and every wedding. Football season has robbed him for 23 years, at least for, 7 months of the year, of his personal life. 6 months of the year, his personal life. I'm not saying I'm Tom Brady, but man, there's way too many funerals and birthdays and holidays that I have to miss. Unfortunately, I may be stupid or something. My risk reward's not like him. It's not like adding up to being the GOAT. Or what is Brady making? $50 million a year. But I get what he's getting at. And Giselle might have had enough. That's not good. This has got to be the last season for Tom Brady, right? Unless they get divorced and then he's got nothing. Instead of being a bachelor and scrolling through Tinder, he's like, well, let's go win one more Super Bowl. But anyway, this week, I'm banking on the Bucs and their defense. And finally, because of that, how about this, okay? Always the optimist. Give me the Cowboys plus 7.5 against the Bengals. This is my pendulum swings too far approach, okay? Cowboys at home. Cooper Rush playing. Joe Burrow wasn't good last week. I think Joe Burrow is good and will be good over the long haul, but is there a Super Bowl hangover even for the loser of the Super Bowl? He was really not good. What did he throw, 4 interceptions last week? Cowboys defense is still pretty decent. Trayvon Diggs gets interceptions. I'm not telling you that adds up to a Cowboys win, but give me 7.5. That's a lot of points in the NFL. That's a lot of points in the NFL. I know, it's Cooper Rush. I know. They're at home. And I'm hoping there was a Bucs defense effect. And maybe I'm just optimistic and need another reason to root with some hope for the Cowboys on Sunday. But give me the Cowboys. That everybody is overreacting to how bad the Cowboys are and how good the Bengals are based upon last year right now, that 7.5 is too much. Cowboys plus 7.5, Bucs minus 2.5, Colts minus 4, BYU plus 3.5, Nebraska plus 10.5. Those are Will's picks of the week. That's going to do it for me today. I will see you again over the weekend in response to some football games on social media, at Will Kane on Twitter, and again here on Monday. Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.